Padraig Berry, thank you so much for agreeing to come on my podcast, The Handshake. And Padraig and myself go back a fair distance now at this stage, and he has been a great mentor and tutor in all things psychometric. So, Padraig, thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Teresa. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you.
I've watched your previous podcasts and really good. I'm in very good company, so happy to be here. So I suppose the probably the easiest way to profile myself is to tell about where I am and how I ended up here.
Sure.
I work in the area of psychometric assessments. So I work mainly with leaders in the whole domain of leadership and helping people understand themselves and understand others better. If you stop and think a moment about what it means to be successful in the long term, if we can get away from Q1 and Q2 and start thinking about lifetimes and ask what does success look like over the long term, it really comes down to people and our interactions with people and how successful we've been in our interactions with other people. And to do this, to be successful in those areas, you need to understand yourself, number one, and you need to be able to manage yourself, and you need to understand others and be able to manage your interactions with them for success. So a long time ago, I went to college. I went to college in Galway originally, but I went to college in France. I did my MBA in a business school called l'ESSEC, l'École supérieure des sciences économiques et commerciales at Paris. And I got a scholarship to do the program. The program was called EMI. It was a joint program with Cornell University. And I got a scholarship from an Irish-American guy called Chuck Feeney.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I started working as a dean's assistant because he liked me. I was an Irish guy, and all the Americans liked the Irish guys. The dean was an American, and I got a job working for him to help me fund my MBA. And I met this guy who'd given me the scholarship for my fees, and I found this man was not at all what I expected. We all know the level 5 leader, the servant leader, this whole idea from Jim Collins and Good Great. And this really was an amazing man, incredibly bright. The smartest man I've ever met, but a man full of humility, full of compassion, with a genuine desire to put the wind in people's sails. They say if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Go together, sure.
And he was really about bringing people along with him. And his capacity to build relationships with people struck me.
Right. Here's my handshake. My handshake is everywhere. Go on.
Yeah. It really struck me. It wasn't just his influence or his impact on me. I saw that everybody that he was associated loved him. And anyway, so I finished my program and I went off working in Africa and other places. And I came back up to France and then to the UK. And I didn't like what I was doing. I was working, doing feasibility studies for banks and whatever. And it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I wrote him a letter.
Right.
And I knew where he lived, where his house was in London. And I wrote him a letter saying, if this is it, I'm going to shoot myself. There's got to be more to it than this. So he contacted me and we walked and talked for a period of time. And eventually I joined him and set up his investment company here in Ireland. And I ran that for him for a decade. And when I worked with him, a couple of things struck me. The first thing that struck me was I was big into strategy, the classic MBA, Sure. I was big into strategy. It was all about strategy and the big goals and how we managed it all. And over time, working with him, I came to realize it actually wasn't. And it was all about people. And if you move the people, you move the needle. It was about the people. And so when you ask the question, which would you rather have, an A strategy and a B team, or an A team and a B strategy? Well, it's obvious. Take the A team because they just dump the B strategy and write a new A strategy. Whereas the A strategy, the B team would never be able to implement the A strategy. And I came to realize it really was about the people. And so when I eventually finished working with him, I moved into the world of consulting and I joined a company that used these psychometric assessments as a consultant. Worked mainly with a lot of training development, mainly leadership and mainly entrepreneurs, or let's call it the entrepreneurial type of animal. And did a lot of work with those kind of people using psychometrics and other tools indeed to help them grow. And I became more and more interested in the people side and less interested in the strategic or strategy side.
Right.
We still did the strategy, but again, if I had the choice, hire the right guy or get the right strategy, I hired the right guy.
Well, Chuck really had left a mark on you. He really sent you in a different direction, didn't he?
He had a huge influence on me.
Sure.
I would say it was a transformative experience.
Wow.
I mean, he was an exceptional human being.
Absolutely.
And he was never your boss. He was your chairman, and he worked with you to support you. It was most of it. I traveled the world with him, so I did. I can remember no matter where we'd be down in Japan, we'd be in China, you'd be in anywhere you went, all over the state, and anywhere you went, Mr. Feeney, Mr. Feeney.
Right.
They all loved him. Everybody loved him.
Yes.
He could speak loads of languages. He could speak to them in their own language. He could communicate with them. There was the Pope or the Pauper made no difference. I can remember once, actually, just give you an idea how an interesting man, how curious he was. I remember once we were waiting for him to come into town, into Dublin, and had all the team ready, with all the reports ready, all set up on the boardroom table. And he never showed up. We waited all morning. He never showed up. And eventually around lunchtime, and he stuck his head in the door. I said, thanks be to God, he's here. He said, Padraig, great. Sorry, I can't make it today. He said, and then he opened the door a bit wide. And this young lad beside it, I met this young lad on the plane on the way over. We're having a great chat. I'm taking him to lunch. I'll see you tomorrow.
Oh, wow. That put you in your place.
Yeah, but that was the kind of person he was. He was interested in what this young person he met. This young person was Iranian, and he was living in the States, and he was on the plane, and he was interested in what he was doing, and so on and so forth. So he was fascinated by that. He was always learning, and always focusing on people. And eventually, that guy, we ended up hiring that guy. He ended up working with us, the young lad. So that's what led me into this whole people area. Now, what was really interesting was we were using psychometrics in the consulting world, in the training world, in the leadership development world, and eventually the opportunity came to buy the rights of this franchise basically here and now. And I bought it because I liked the tools so much. I bought the business. It was Mr. Gillette or one of them. He said I liked them so much I bought the business. And I went into this business, and it's been a wonderful business to be in, and a wonderful career to be in, because you're working with really typically bright people. I don't mean just bright in terms of raw intellect. I mean bright in terms of their capacity to use whatever they had, be it their behavioral style or their motivators or their acumen or whatever. They had strong EQ. We typically work with people who have high emotional intelligence, active in the area of emotional intelligence. And as you and I both know, that is the differentiator at the top of the pile. I have a great video clip done by Daniel Goleman talking to Google in 2007. You'll be familiar with this, I'm sure.
I've heard it, yes.
Yeah, and he talks about what's the relationship between IQ, raw intellect, and EQ. And of course, there's not. It's random, completely random. But he says, but in superior roles, in leadership roles, there's a floor in IQ. So there's a floor in it, and the gap then isn't in IQ. The gap is in EQ. That's the difference between the superior performers and the also rans in leadership. So that's sort of taken to me to where I am today and talking to you.
And that's how I met you, was through your training of me in the DISC and all the 5 sciences.
That's it.
And I don't know who introduced me to you, but I remember meeting you in the RDS, and we started from that. Yeah.
I think, in fact, Teresa, if I recall correctly, I think we were having Ron Price and the Complete Leader over, and we're doing a launch of Complete Leader, a program here in Ireland.
And I went to that, yes.
That's it, and you went to that. That's exactly it. A wonderful man. And a wonderful program.
That was 2017, 2018, wasn't it?
2017, that's it.
Yeah.
2 years after I bought the business.
Wow. So I'm speaking to the right person when I'm trying to find resonance with this idea of the handshake, and particularly as we move more and faster into the AI zone. I think that handshake is irreplaceable. And you speak of EQ. I think maybe the differentiator between the human and AI going forward is going to be EQ and empathy, and the ability to connect, and the ability to actually embrace. I don't think the human is replaceable, but we're at a sort of a crossroads where you and I have our our brains developed in a traditional sense, and we've been used to the pen and the paper and working our way through stuff. The youngsters coming up, the digital natives, will have a totally different take on what's coming down the line. And there's a whole disruption happening, really. We're at to my mind, we're at a big crossroads. But coming back to your training of me in DISC and the whole 5 sciences idea, how do DISC and the aligned tools foster stronger connections, leadership, and teamwork, elements that align so well with the notion of the handshake that I'm pursuing?
Well, interesting. Before I answer that, let me just go back to what you're talking about in terms of AI, the handshake, emotional intelligence, relationships, and so on. I have 4 children,
Mm-hmm.
and I find it interesting. The youngest is 22, the oldest is 29, 3 girls and 1 boy. And I find it interesting to observe the youngest and observe the anxiety that she and indeed her cohort are experiencing. Partially from COVID, I think, but I think also partially from the impact that social media is having on them, and their inability, and there seems to be some sort of inability to develop relationships. And let me explain what I mean by that. An inability or an unwillingness to accept relationships at face value, to accept that they're worthwhile human beings, that they have something of value to contribute. There seems to be some sort of separation between them and their friends. Well, I know she's my friend, but
It's a trust thing, isn't it? And it's also a self-confidence thing. And what you see is not what you get. What you see online, really, in reality,
that's correct. And they have aspirations that I think are unrealistic. I'm not sure how grounded they are. And I think this is coming through social media. Now, AI, I find interesting. For example, I just did a workshop this morning, a leadership workshop, and with 19 people, so the senior leadership team and the direct reports. And it was very, very interesting, actually, to have the conversation with them and go through it. And at the very, very end in Zoom, it produced for me a synopsis of everything that was said in the workshop. So, for example, you right now could have picked the AI app down there, clicked it on you in Zoom, and it would have produced for you at the end of it a summary of everything we've discussed. And it would reorganize them by heading. So we'd be talking about a bit here, a bit here, and a bit here, but it would grab all those bits and buttons.
Yes.
And so I did that. And then I did a quick edit, a 5-minute edit, and I sent it on to my client. So AI is really useful. And that was a handshake. They said, wow, we had this workshop. I was on Zoom, so I wasn't physically present, but I have a lot of energy. You can see the kind of style I have, my behavior style. So I have a lot of energy. So it comes across quite well in Zoom. But then they get this thing at the end, which is a summary of everything we said, and who said what under various headings. And so AI can facilitate handshakes as well, because that will now go out with a link to the recording of the video. So AI has a role to play in it. To take your point on empathy and take your point on the human being, I think if a spaceship lands, if ever an alien came, it won't be an alien. The distances, so it'll be a machine that will come. And what have we sent out into space? We sent machines to space. We haven't sent people out to space. So I think if ever meets an alien, we won't be talking to an alien. We'll be talking to a machine, a very sophisticated machine perhaps, but a machine nonetheless. And I define machine as follows. We are biological machines. We are organs that have evolved. We have programs, algorithms that are running, but algorithms that were written by natural selection over millions of years, but programs nonetheless. And self-learning programs like AI, programs that can learn and develop. And we relate to each other because we're the same. We don't relate to a machine unless it mimics us.
Yeah.
So I think that AI will be able to mimic certain things, but it'll never be able to mimic. You talk about empathy, for example. It can fake empathy. It can feign empathy, but I don't think it can actually genuinely be empathetic. So, for example, if you go through a life trauma, you can have a robot there giving you a little rub and tell you everything's okay. But it won't be I don't think it'll be the same as having a human being there beside you and feeling the warmth and feeling and knowing they're suffering with you if you wish to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So And I agree with you. I think that emotional intelligence is the differentiator right now in leadership.
Mhm.
And I think it will be the differentiator in general. Even take something as simple as a salesperson or somebody behind the desk in a shop or behind the counter in a shop. What are we looking for? I can still remember years ago, I used to drink in a pub when I lived in Dublin in Leeson Street, O'Brien's on the junction there in Leeson Street.
Yeah.
And do you know why I used to drink there? Because when I walked into the pub, the public would look up and he'd catch my eye.
Yes.
And it might be 5 minutes before he got to me, but he caught my eye. He recognized me.
Of course.
Recognize me. So, and what we're looking for in a retail store, in sales, we're looking for recognition. The person recognizes us as a human being. They see us and they recognize us. And so I think that would be the defining skill throughout most roles, will be your ability to work effectively with other human beings, to recognize them, to empathize, as you rightly point out, so they feel something. They feel, what's that great expression? We don't remember what people do to us. Remember how they make us feel.
It does feel, absolutely. And I think it's the human and the human anchorage, and to have the confidence to actually use AI as the tool to advance on every level, to advance what he can achieve. But if I were, for instance, looking for a leader in my organization, talk to me in terms of using the 5 sciences as a need to getting the person job fit right. And there are some sectors that embrace this openly and use it as part of a suite of approaches. And there are other sectors who are totally adverse to it. So talk to me, and we try to convince those who are adverse that maybe psychometrics should rank in there as part of the personnel selection and assessment process.
Okay, let's step back for a moment and talk about something before we talk about that. I want you to imagine, just reflect for a moment on the great leaders that you've met in your life. Just think about them. As you're listening to us now, just think about this. What were the characteristics that they had? Can you name them? And then think about the ineffective or ineffectual leaders that you've known in your life. What characteristics did they have? Can you name them? And when you stop and you think about this, you'll realize you're talking about the things that we measure in psychometrics. You're talking about how they made you feel.
Absolutely.
Okay. So did they make you feel that you were heard? Did they make you feel worthwhile, worth more? Did they close the gap between your image and your ideal and make you feel that did they raise your self-esteem? Did they give you confidence to go forward and do things? And so on and so forth. These are the things that great leaders do. And they hold themselves accountable. They take responsibility. So these are great things. Now, these are the things you measure and develop using psychometrics. How do you measure and develop them? If you don't measure them, if you don't name it, how can you do something with it? You can say, we're going to run a leadership program. Fine. What does that mean? What are the areas? How do we know the person even needs development in that area? How can we measure these things? So psychometrics, psycho, the mind, and metric, is a research to measure. It's all about developing tools that are valid and that are reliable. So in terms of reliable, they can repeat them, and valid in that when you ask a particular question, you get an answer. That actually is the answer that's required. So that they don't get a different answer and it gives you a different score. And companies like TTI, the company I'm involved in, companies like TTI, that's what they do. And it's all they do. Now, we also do things like leadership development. So we take the tools and we apply them, but our core activity is the development and distribution of these tools. So developing super accurate tools. For example, you mentioned DISC earlier on. If you go to our lab in Scottsdale, Arizona, just north of Phoenix, they can sit you down and put couple of things on your head and hold up words and pictures and things in front of you and measure your behavioral profile.
Like the functional MRI.
Yeah, it's a functional MRI. Exactly what it is. And that's exactly it. And they can actually see what parts of the brain are lighting up, in what way do they light up. Is it left, is it right, or is it the middle, or is it nothing at all? Is it blue, is it green, whatever. And they can actually come up with your behavioral profile. I think a 94% or something correlation between the tests that you fit in, the assessment you fill in online. So this is amazing stuff. This is real stuff. if we talk about the wiring of our brains for a
Mm-hmm.
moment, if we say that we are, in fact, a biological computer, for want of a better way to describe it, I know people don't say that anymore, but let's just say we are. We have all these neural connections, these synaptic connections. We've all this chemistry flowing, all this electricity flowing, all these wonderful things happening up there. And we know now that we can reprogram them.
Sure.
We know neuroplasticity, we know is real. It fires together, wires together. We know that we can actually change the wiring. We can form new habits. Just keep it very, very
Of
simple.
course.
We can form a new habit.
Yeah.
And so we can change these things. But to change these things, we have to first measure something to be changed. How are we going to change it? How do we know if we change it? How do we know what to do unless we measure? So psychometrics allow you to measure something. So to get to your question, for example, on benchmarking a role for a leader, how can you match somebody to a role unless you can measure the role and measure the person in the same way? You can't. So in a benchmark, what you do very simply is you identify what are the key deliverables or the key accountabilities of a role. For example, if somebody gets the role of leader, what will be different in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, 24 months' time? What would have changed? What will we see? What will they bring to it? So we have very, very key deliverables. And then we ask ourselves a question. What kind of person is required to be a superior performer in that area to deliver those things? So what kind of behaviors do we want to see? What kind of motivators, like what engages the person, what excites them, what
driving forces,
and what kind of competence or skills have they developed? What kind of acumen capacity do they have? How clearly do they see themselves in the world as a consequence? How balanced and are their decisions and their judgments? What kind of emotional intelligence do they have? How well do they understand their own emotional makeup? How well can they regulate it? How well can they understand somebody else's emotional makeup and regulate the interaction between them? If you can measure a job that way, and then measure an individual that way, you can compare them. And now all of a sudden we can say, we know what we're looking for, and we can remove all the unconscious bias that we all have around all the things that you can't mention on a video like this, but we have all these biases, or they're socially built into us as we're domesticated, as we grow up as young people. And how do we get over all those biases? Like the person's accent, how articulate they are, how they dress, how tall, small, big, thin, fat, whatever they are.
Their potential.
What is it? How can we get past all those biases and actually measure an individual and measure a job so we get the best fit for the job by knowing what the job actually requires for superior performance? And that's what you're doing here. So, and particularly, you need to be looking at their development. I mean, for example, we can look at politicians at the moment in the world. There's a big election going on as we're recording this.
Yes.
And you look at the two individuals, and irrespective of what you believe about their policies or how right or wrong they are about things, there's one thing we can clearly say: one person is more emotionally developed than the other. And so we can see this clearly.
Sure.
And so ask yourself the question: who would you rather have in charge? An emotionally developed person or an immature person emotionally? And to me, it really comes down to these kind of things. And in terms of leadership, it is as we said earlier, it is the differentiator. Emotional intelligence, the ability to work effectively with other people. I mean, what is a leader? Except somebody with followers.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
And to be a leader, you need your followers to come on the journey with you. So your ability to work effectively with other people is the key.
So the whole leadership development, though, it's on a continuum. You don't just come with the whole package in one. It's to be awake to the ongoing process of development as a leader and to grow into the role as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I often have to laugh when I hear people talk about, oh, he was a naturally born leader, or she was a naturally born leader. And I know they weren't. They just learned them earlier than the rest of us.
Sure. Maybe more highly aware.
Maybe more highly aware. And that would come from their genes, but also the people who gave them their genes were the people who domesticated them or socialized them when they were young. So they got this double whammy. And then maybe they got a lucky break with a school teacher and a couple of good friends. And look, we had this natural leader, we think, but in fact it wasn't. EQ is a learned skill. Leadership is a learned skill that can be developed and can be grown. And practice makes permanent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Permanent, not perfect. And if we practice the wrong things, they become permanent. Practice makes permanent. And so the secret to this development is we name the game. You have to name it. And then we put in place, what are the things I need to do to improve in that particular area? Let's say it's self-awareness, or let's say, it's a particular behavior, or let's say it's a particular competency. What's the specific thing? We name it, and then we put in place the program to develop that area. The theory of constraints. I'm a great believer in building on strengths. However, one has to say that in the theory of constraints, we find the blockage. What's the area that's tripping you up? Where's the area of weakness? And we develop that area.
Yeah. Or maybe you're over-exaggerating your strengths and overusing it.
Or over-exaggerating, overusing. For example, you asked me on this podcast that would I speak slowly? Would I calm down a little bit? Because, of course, I have a lot of energy and I get very enthusiastic about my subject.
Of course.
It becomes too much. People can't follow what I'm saying. They can't understand what I'm saying.
They get lost in it. Yeah, absolutely.
They get lost in it.
But if, for instance, I'm coming from or working with a sector who are adverse to psychometrics, and they're holding interviews and they're working on whims as to the suitability of a candidate maybe to be a leader in an organization, how do you set about converting them or convincing them that they really need to use psychometrics as part of the process? Only part, not to be totally dependent on it, but to use it as part of the information gathering process so that the person job fit is right, because the downside of it is if they get it wrong and the person is in a permanent position, you can't dislodge them and the damage is huge.
I think there's two parts to this. The first part is removing unconscious bias. So the whole benchmarking process is critical. What happens? We hire people that we like, and we like people who are like us, and we don't even know we're doing it. It's unconscious. We have racial prejudice, we have gender prejudice, we have age prejudice, we have educational prejudice, and so on and so forth. And we are unconscious of these biases. And I find it interesting how often my children pick me up on some of my prejudice that I was unaware of. And I've lived in many parts of the world. I would have thought, for example, in terms of race, that I lacked all prejudice. And then they say, "Do you know what you just said, Dad?" And I go, "Geez, where did that come from?"
Hold the mirror up to you, yeah.
So we have these unconscious biases. And the first thing is you have to remove those. So in fact, if you talk about the job person fit, you have to remove that bias. So you know, what does the job actually require, as opposed to what do I like? We're not hiring a person that I'm going to be best friends with. We're hiring a person who's going to do the job effectively, in a superior way. So to do that, we have to measure the job and say, what will that person look like? And then measure a person to compare them. Otherwise, how are you going to do it? All you're going to do is bring your bias to it. The second point, I think, is, I have a great joke I often say. You'll often see a recruiter, and they're there like this. They got their elbows on the desk. They're leaning their chin on their things, and they've got a pile of files beside them. And there's a candidate sitting opposite them. Do you know what they're doing? They're praying. They're saying, "Oh Lord, let this one be right," because the truth of the matter is, I haven't got a clue. I'm looking at the candidate, I'm reading CV, I'm reading references. We all know who writes the CV. Who writes the CV? I mean, you're not going to write a bad CV. Who writes the CV about themselves? We have references. Who gives an honest reference? So you're looking across at somebody and you say, I need to actually talk about a handshake. I need to actually experience this person. I need to get inside this person and understand this person, understand what's really going on. To do that, I need to be able to profile them and ask the appropriate questions that the job requires. What are the questions I need to ask to identify whether this person has the characteristics for success in this role? And this is what it gives you. It gives you, you talk about gathering information. Why would you go into an interview with a CV? When you go into an interview with all sorts of insights. Now, let's not kid ourselves. You said it's not the full process. At most, it's a third of the process. And that's being generous. Psychometrics are what they are. That's all they are. They are what they are. They're not a silver bullet. They don't answer every single question. They're not a guarantee of success. What you're trying to do is mitigate the risk. You're trying to reduce the risk of the hire and give yourself the best chance of hiring the best person, i.e. the person best suited, best matched to that role. That's what you're trying to do. And any tool that can help you do that is useful. Secondly, that's part one. Part two is, think about this for a moment. When you've hired somebody into a role, as part of the onboarding process, you want to be able to share with them their future. So imagine you can say to them, there's the role, and there's you, and here's how ye compare, and here's the gap, and here's the development plan we've prepared for you to help you bridge that gap so you can become superior performer in all aspects of the role. And in 12, 36 months' time, whatever it is, when you've mastered this role and you've got, here's the next logical step in your career, and here's your gaps between that. And we'll be putting a development plan in place to get you ready. So in 12, 24 months' time, you're ready to move into that role if somebody moves out, and so on and so forth. And here's the profile of the team, the people you're going to be working with, their profiles. And here's how you're going to work effectively with them. And here's where the potential clash areas are going to be, and the problem areas will be, and so on and so forth. What it gives you is, I believe in the Western reductionist method. I've always believed in it. Now, I'm a bit of a Buddhist, and I'm a bit of an Easterner.
Yeah.
I like the holistic, the big approach. However, you cannot deny the advantage of the reductionist method, where we break things into the smallest part, understand them there, and then put them back together. And psychometrics are giving you insights into how somebody does things, why they do what they do, how active they are they in the areas of understanding themselves and others, how clearly do they see the world, and what kind of decisions can they make, and so on and so forth. It gives you these insights. It names the game, and by naming the game, it allows you to actually do something about it, as opposed to, Teresa, well, she's wonderful.
I know.
Where do
But isn't there a whole piece of work there in the training of interviewing panels and in the openness to bring in subject matter experts to help them in the process?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's interesting. So when you get back to the key accountability exercise, the key to the key accountability exercise is subject matter experts. You get people who actually have an intimate understanding of the role from different perspectives. So you as an individual, your children, your spouse, your parents, your friends, your employer, your direct report, everybody has a different perception of you. They see you different ways. So you're looking at different views of you as an individual. Psychometrics give you a similar view of an individual from different perspectives, and subject matter experts. So it could be an incumbent in the role, somebody who supervises the role, somebody who reports directly to the role, peers of the role, somebody in the role in a different organization. These are people who understand the role intimately, but from different perspectives. And they give you a very, very clear understanding of what is required for superior performance in the role. So you need to bring those into the process. Getting back to interviewing proper, most people, particularly in the world of education and in the civil service, it's competency-based interviewing.
Sure.
And they use competency models. And I have to say, I'm not a huge fan. And I'll tell you why. It's not that I don't believe in competencies. I do believe in competencies, obviously. I think that what happens is, if you look at a particular competence, how do you measure? So they talk about leadership. They talk about interpersonal skills. They talk about teamwork.
Sure.
There are interesting things to talk about, but how can we measure?
Show me the evidence. Show me the
evidence. How do we know these things? So we get a reference that he's a great team player. Hallelujah. And that's about as useful as a piece of paper.
Appreciate,
yeah. So where do we go with this? And this is the problem with the competence model. You need to get behind the competencies and say, how can we actually measure? So coming up with a competence model for a job is valid. These are the competencies, here's the skills, whatever. And we get a behavioral competency, we get all kinds of competencies. But we have to be able to measure. So if you look at our benchmarking process, it's not unlike a competency model, except we talk about behaviors and driving force and acumen capacity and so on and so forth. The competency model doesn't necessarily name them the same way, but it's the same kind of process. But the question then is, how do we now measure an individual in a way that we've measured the jobs, we can compare the two? And that's where those fall down in my regard. I think that we're looking for references, we're looking for testimonials, we're looking for other things. We're looking for, obviously, if you want to measure somebody, you follow them around with a clipboard. That's the best way to do it. But who can do that? Somebody coming for a job in interview, you're not going back to their old job and follow them around the clipboard and see how are they doing. So we can't do that. We have to use tools that aren't perfect. They're imperfect. What they say, all models are broken, but some are useful. These are like all models. They are what they are. They're 85% accurate, let's say, but they're useful. And that's why I think it's really important. And so training people to use this, for example, interview panels, developing those panels so they understand the power of them. I think the resistance to it, Teresa, comes from people feeling that we're boxing people and we're trying to say, if you have this particular attribute, then, or if you don't have this attribute, then, and that is not the case.
Or an inability or a refusal to let go of power, and power once enjoyed and you want to hold on to in order to get your type of people in.
Well, as you warned me to be politically correct in this podcast, I wasn't going to say something like that. But let me tell you a story. I worked with, no, that's not true, I didn't work with. I tried to work with a large recruitment organization, very, very big, who would have used a lot of our tools, so commercially made a lot of sense to me. And I invested a lot of time with the CEO of this organization. And eventually, at the end of it all, she sat me down. She said, Padraig, that was all very intellectually stimulating and interesting. But I just know. I said, I beg your pardon? She said, when I'm interviewing a candidate, I just know.
Yeah.
And I said, you just know what? I said, I just know that they're the right candidate for that culture, for that team, for that organization, for that job, for that. I just know. And I thought, heaven help me. I mean, this is one organization I'll never be using to recruit.
I know.
So yes, there is a lot of that. It's like the matchmaker. It's the same concept. I know they'd be a good match. I know it intuitively, instinctively. It's part of my genes. You know the joke. I'll tell you a joke. So the interviewer is going around the school interviewing all the young kids. And he comes to John. He says, Johnny, what do you want to be? John said, I want to be a doctor. He said, oh, great, Johnny, you want to be a doctor. And to do that, what do you need to do? Well, I need to study really hard, get X number of points. And then he goes to Mary and says, what do you want to do? I want to be a teacher. And why do you do that? And she explains it. And then it gets to Mick. He says, to Mick, what do you want to be? And Mick says, I want to be a politician. Oh, what do you need to do for that? Oh, nothing at all. It's just in my blood.
Wow. But I think in the process, the interviewing process, we often overlook the other side of the table, the interviewee. And sometimes maybe they get a feel for the culture of the organization that they're interviewing for, and they may self-eliminate. And I remember back when I was 20, being offered a job by this guy. I had already been offered a permanent job, but I was offered a job which was closer to home. And I said, can you give me a half an hour to think about it? And he said, no, I'm very in a hurry. I have something important, I have an important meeting to go to. So I want a yes or no now. And at 20, I turned to him on the phone and I said, I'm sorry, I couldn't work for you.
Yeah.
I couldn't work for you. And it was a job that my parents at the time really wanted me to get and would have loved it. And my dad said to me, well, did you get the job offer? And I said, yeah. And about 20 minutes later, he said, did you take it? And I told him what I had said. Oh, he said, forget it. I was now going to Dublin to work in an inner city area and I was turning down, royalty up the road. But, in retrospect, my whole career trajectory, my life would have gone in a different way had I taken that. And I probably would have walked out anyway because an authoritarian, dictatorial person.
Well, you were a smart woman at 20 for sure. Not many people have the emotional maturity at 20 to make those calls. But you were right, of course.
I know I was right. But this thing of the psychological contract, they say it starts at the time of interview because each party has expectations.
Well, let me share something with you. I hired, I was part of a process where working with a client where they were hiring head of sales and CEO designate.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through the process, the benchmarking process, the interviewing process, and then the onboarding and the development plan and so on. And I remember the feedback from the guy. He said, I took the job because of the process. I had such confidence in the company and such confidence. If they were willing to do this robust process, take me through it, and clearly were matching me, I had confidence in the fact they knew what they were doing. Yes. And I had confidence to work for this company. And I used it as a testimonial for years.
Very good. It was a great observation. It gave him that sense of a promise, and that he would be guided in his career. And he would.
Let me tell you the opposite, Teresa. I built a hotel once upon a time at the Castletroy Park Hotel in Limerick. And
that's when you were with Chuck Feeney, was it?
I was with Chuck Feeney,
Yes.
And I was interviewing for a general manager, and there was this candidate over from England, an English guy, and he was on holidays in Ireland, and he said, "Yeah, I can meet you on such and such day." So I met him there on site, and I interviewed him. And at the end of the interview, he said, "Like, Padraig, that was really, really interesting, but I wouldn't work for ye in a million years. You've no idea what you're doing." And I took it on board. And the interview process, he asked me, "Show me the balance sheet, show me the P&L, show me the objectives, show me the budget, show me this," and I couldn't.
I know.
I couldn't because I hadn't got them done. And I realized then that he, in fact, was infinitely more credible than I was. And that he was looking at me saying, "I wouldn't work for this guy." So it was a wake-up call for me, but it's the exact same as you. He said, "No, this is not a company I could work for." And
that's all part about adaptability, being able to learn as you go and not always be right. And that is a real good sign in a person as well, that they're highly adaptable. I don't think people fully realize that adaptability stretches to that level as well.
Well, it's interesting. We talk about, in the world of DISC, we talk about stretching to other people. We say everybody can flex a little bit like the chicken there. To stretch them is harder, but to go off over there to somebody is really difficult because you're actually fundamentally changing your style. It's not a question of toning it down or toning it up. You're actually behaving, for example, in the opposite way to which you're going to behave. And that requires emotional intelligence. And the people who thrive in life are the people who are able to adapt to situations and to people and stretch and go there without it stressing them, without it causing a problem. Think about the person that the minute you ask them to behave out of courage, they get completely stressed and they get completely uptight and completely whatever.
I have a phrase I use: knowing me, understanding you. So self-awareness is the baseline.
Yeah.
Being happy in your own skin and being open to develop, knowing your shortcomings, knowing your challenges, and working on them to render them strengths.
In acumen capacity, when we measure, we would always, when I work in senior hires, a lot of my clients and our DAAs, our distributors, would come to us and ask us to get involved in a senior hire, only because we understand the science is probably obviously better than anybody else. And I always use acumen capacity, always. Always use HD.
It's wonderful. It's so accurate.
Wonderful instrument. And there's two things I'm looking for. I'm looking for the REV score, the gap between the external worldview and the internal worldview. That's less than 0.05. I know they're emotionally stable. And number two, I'm looking for on the sense of self, I'm looking for a negative bias. I don't care how high I do care how high or low the score is. I want the score, let's say 80, 85 for a senior position. But I want a negative bias, i.e. they realize they're still on the journey, they're still learning. And that's critical, I think, for a leader. Interesting, the workshop I did this morning, I would do a lot of confidence in the leader. He was the first one to step up and say, "Here's what came back from the 360, here's what came back from the psychometric, here's my development plan, here's what I'm going to do, here's what I'm committing to." And there's a guy he's the CEO of a big company, and with his leadership team, and not just his senior leadership team, the level below it as well, the managers. Like 19 of them opening up and saying, "This is where I am, and here's my development plan, here's what I'm going to do." So that to me is a real sign of leadership, not having to be right, acknowledging mistakes, being responsible for what actually happened, and then saying, I'm going to step up, I'm going to change, I'm going to grow, I'm going to develop.
And with the advent of AI and this ability to pick the key words, to get the key candidates in for interview, and maybe several layers of interview have gone on with before the face-to-face happens. What do you think of that?
Yeah, okay. Now this is a great question, and I'm going to start and tell you about how Chuck Feeney hired me.
Right.
We walked and we talked. He said, "You can't walk," and he walked. I'm a runner, but he walked really briskly. And if you're a runner, walking fast is very hard.
Because you want to go into a sprint.
You want to go into a sprint, or you want to walk slowly. And I could never walk fast. And he said, "You can't walk fast and lie." I found it really, he said, when you're walking fast, he said, like with somebody and you're having a conversation, it's very hard to make up a lie and walk fast. You tend to tell the truth. And I remember laughing. Walk and talk, Walter, we had these interviews. Now, if you stop and think about the whole interview process and how you actually ask the right questions, So when you have somebody sitting in front of you, you get back to your handshake. You need to have an experience of the person. You need to get past all of that stuff, and you need to be able to have a conversation with the person. You want to meet the actual real person. That requires insights that psychometrics give you. Now, there are people who can do it without them. Let's not kid ourselves. There are people who are just naturally really good at that piercing clarity, that ability to get insights of it and ask just the right question. My old coach, the guy coached me for years. I'd make a presentation over half an hour. At the end, he'd say, "That's really interesting, Padraig, but let me ask you a question." He'd ask me one question. I'd go, "Oh my God, never thought of that. I'd be gone for a month working on it." So the ability to ask piercing questions, or people are very, very good at it, but psychometrics give you an advantage on that. The other point is, before you go to a whole series of interviews, you can just, if you've profiled the role, so that's what the role requires, and you just screen out interviews or candidates, just screen them out. And literally, you say, no, don't meet, they don't match, they don't match, they don't match, they don't match. You can have hard screens, you can have soft screenings. You can have very, very simple process of meeting. When you sit down to 2 or 3 people, these are people who theoretically, at least, should all be superior performers in the role.
Sure.
And then you're choosing between them. And then you use the tools for the insightful questions. So, for example, if you benchmark the role, it will give you questions under behaviors, driving forces, acumen, and so on, competence. It gives you specific questions that you can ask to identify particular things, to tease things out with people, and to get to know the real person. I believe in the three interviews. And one is going for a walk, one is going for dinner, and one is I get the people that this person will be supervising to interview them. And what I really like about that process is they see the person from a completely different perspective, and the person behaves differently. And that's what I want to see. And I've had people come back to me, like 4 or 5 people who had lunch with a candidate and come back and say, "Oh no, gee, Mackers, do you know, he started talking at the beginning of lunch and he didn't shut up for the whole lunch."
I know a few sectors that could really do with this approach. But coming back to it, there are going to be major job losses imminent now with the advent of AI. So, how would the psychometrics fare out in there and hold their significance, their relevance versus AI and the power of AI and all these new things that are coming out by the day with AI?
Okay, I disagree.
Right, okay.
I disagree because I look at history.
Right.
And I'm a great believer in history. I think we're just repeating the same.
Repeats itself.
Yeah,
nobody learns anything from it. Go on.
Yeah, it looks different. It looked different when we were around with clubs beating the saber-tooth tiger from today with AI. It looks different, but it's the same route. We're going through the same circle again, the same cycle again. So I look at the past and I look at all the various innovations that have happened over history, and what they did was they increased productivity. They made us better off. They didn't actually destroy jobs. They changed jobs for sure, but they didn't destroy them. And if you look at the success of the Western world, the capitalist system, for all its foibles, for all its weaknesses, look at the productivity levels in that part of the world, and look at history. Never has there been such productivity, i.e., such wealth generated per head of capita, i.e., such wealth available in terms of resources for medicine, for education, and for whatever. So we've never had as good.
But it's about man's ability to distribute that wealth. Then
that's a separate conversation. We won't go down a political conversation.
All right, I won't take you off your track. Come on, keep going.
But the point I want to make is, so I look at history. I say yes, jobs were replaced with other jobs.
Yes.
With other jobs. So they were certain, for sure. For example, if you're a person who's working in a legal department, looking for references, case studies, your job's finished. AI will be doing the search and be doing those in 10 seconds. What would take you a week? So those jobs are gone. So what will that person do with that? And you ready for this? With that skill set, with that behavioral style, with those motivators, that acumen, with those competencies, that EQ, what is that person suited to? And if we can understand that, then we can find actually the job for you. In fact, this is what you can do now using AI or using whatever. This is what you can do where you will fit in well. I cannot tell you how many people over the years have come to me and said, I have so-and-so, can you help them? And we profile them, we review them, we say, what are you doing in this job?
Yeah.
What are you doing this job? You should be doing, in fact, no wonder you're stressed and exhausted, whatever. You should be, this is where you will fit in naturally. Let me just give you a simple example. I want you to imagine a race.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to talk about race. I'm going to talk about politics for a moment. Imagine a race. Imagine you're a black man in America and you're a white man in America.
Right.
Well, it's really simple. The black man is starting 100 meters back behind you. What chance does that guy have? I mean, there are exceptions to all of these rules, but in general, this guy hasn't got a chance of beating this guy. Why? Because of all the advantages that this person has or the disadvantages this person has. So think about it the same way when you're fitting somebody to a job. Why would you fit somebody to a job for which they're ill-suited? Why would you fit them to a job where just by being themselves, just by being naturally who they are, they're already excelling at the job just by being themselves. And then you add skills to it. Then you upgrade them so they become a genius at it. I always remember in school, and we all got grinds. I got a grind in math, and I got a grind in Irish. Irish because you had to get in your leaving cert, I hated it, and math because I wasn't very good at it. And I remember years later somebody asking me, what were you good at? And I was good at languages. And they said, did you get a grind in those? I said, no, why would I? I was good at them. And they said, you're missing the point. In the States, you get a grind at something you're good at, so you become world class at it.
Specialize. Yeah.
And we don't think that way. We don't say, match the person to the job where just by being themselves, they're great. Think about a sportsman. They're just great at the swing of the golf club or kicking the ball.
If you think of our education system and think of the point system in that vein.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't believe in that system at all. I do believe that people have to display certain skills. So, for example, if you do well in an exam, it means that you're able to retain and recall.
Absolutely.
That's what we're measuring. We're not measuring an aptitude for that particular subject. Now, I would challenge myself on that. So in languages, for example, you're clearly displaying an aptitude.
Sure.
So in certain areas, it makes sense. So if you're being interviewed in Irish or interviewed in French or interviewed whatever in your leaving cert and you're speaking fluently and you love it, well, clearly there's an aptitude there for languages. And if you're being interviewed for a job or you're going to college and you need certain coding skills, certain mathematical skills, if you're getting a straight A in honours math, you clearly have an aptitude for mathematics. So in certain areas it works. In other areas, I think it doesn't work. I think that, in my own opinion, and what do I know? But in my own opinion, I think what we should have is a combination. I was interviewed for college, so I had the requisite, and that was all that was required. It didn't matter how much better you were. So if you had whatever number of honours it was in whatever subject, and you had those, that was all that was required. You didn't need everything. You just need to count. And then it was all down to a series of interviews, and they were looking for aptitude. And interest, and they were looking for different qualities in the individual. Medicine, perhaps, is the best example I can think of. And think about the bedside manner.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been lucky in life in terms of medicine. I've only ever had one interaction with medicine, and I had a surgeon who operated on me, and he was clearly somewhere on the spectrum. I mean, he was a genius. No doubt about it. Man was a genius. What he did perfectly, and I've never had a problem since. And people say afterwards, well, that's incredible that you've never had this problem, that problem, the other problem. But he's in the, now, so what was I looking for? Am I looking for a genius who can operate on me using a robot? Or am I looking for somebody who's got a bedside manner? What am I looking for? In a GP, we're looking for a bedside manner. We're looking for his ability to diagnose or her ability to diagnose. We're looking for a bedside manner. So I think it's got to be a blend. I wouldn't write off the whole point system or the idea of academic excellence. I believe academic excellence. I think it shows discipline. I mean, girls do better than boys. Why? Well, because we know they work harder.
But it doesn't translate in the workplace ultimately, does it, at the board table?
No, it doesn't necessarily translate. But remember when we're doing exams, what do we measure? We're measuring your ability to complete the first year of college. That's what we're measuring. So the GMAT and all these kind of assessments and scores, your leads, all they're measuring is your ability to complete the first year of the program. The not measure your ability to exit the program or your ability to be effective in the workplace. In fact, in the States, there's no correlation between the GMAT and these other scores and success in the workplace. None.
Okay. Yeah.
You know,
I'm a big yin and yang woman. I believe the male and female complement each other, and together they work better.
So do I.
In the boardroom and in the workplace.
So do I. I wish we had more women running the world at the moment, and I mean that sincerely. And that's not a throwaway statement. I genuinely believe that if we had more women, they have a different view of the world. I think it's to do with being a mother. I think it's the whole
more caring,
more caring. It's the whole biology. The whole biology of a woman is fundamentally different to a man, and I think they see and experience the world differently and bring a fundamentally different perspective to the world. And I really lament the lack of women in senior positions in the world. I mean that sincerely. I think we genuinely have a different world. Men have been ruling the world since the saber-tooth tiger, and they haven't done a great job of it.
The mess.
Our natural behavior, our natural style, our natural history is war. Peace, the interludes of peace are the rare exceptions. We think, because we've had one recently over your my lives, that this is the norm. This is the exception. And I think if women were in charge, we'd have a lot more of these exceptions.
Right. That's lovely to hear. That's lovely to hear. That's a lovely way of looking at it. So, ably trained by yourself, I'm a multi-science analyst, and I can be contacted by any organization to go in and do the needful. And Padraig, would you like to finish off by leaving your contact details if anybody would like to get in touch with you, and employer services or access your tools that you market?
Thank you very much, Teresa. It's very easy to contact us. Our website is TTISII.com. And on the website, you'll see videos, you'll see links to videos of us talking about the various sciences, and you'll see all our contact details. So TTISII.com.
Excellent. It's just a fascinating area. I'm thrilled we cross paths, because it is a whole world to me. And long may our
paths keep crossing.
Absolutely. Okay, and thank you for coming on the Handshake. It's so relevant. I'm delighted I invited you along and that you accepted. Thank you.
Very much, Teresa.
Not at all. Thank you.